Hi folks, my name is Mike Dobbs. I'm your host here for Government Matters on Focus Springfield, and we're going to be talking about something that's near and dear to my heart, and that is the Springfield Armory Museum, because I love history. I love the history of this town, of this community, of this region, and joining us today is Superintendent Kelly Fellner, right? Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
Okay, good.
Thanks, Mike.
Good. I'm always glad when I don't screw up the name of the guest. And Kelly has been the superintendent here at the Armory since 2019, so she knows a lot about the area, much less about this important part of our heritage and our history. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
So I'm not greasing you when I say I generally take visitors to Springfield, friends of mine who are in Springfield for the first time, to the Armory Museum.
That's great.
That's always one of the stops. Not just because of what the history, it being the arsenal that George Washington selected the location for, that eventually morphed into an armory where they design and build weapons for the U.S. military, but also, Daniel Shays' rebellion. We probably wouldn't have had the Constitution without it. And the armory was or the arsenal at that point was a center point to his revolution. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's like really sacred ground up there for any different number of reasons. Yeah. I really do go there, and it's always interesting to me. Because you do have changing exhibits, and you get to learn stuff every time you get to go. So I'm a big fan. Great. I'll just tell you up front, I'm a big fan. It's been around for years, the museum, but do you think that it's got the top of mind awareness that probably it should? I've noticed that when you live in an area, you tend to take these type of things for granted. Yeah. And it's a lot of times it's people from out of the area who get really excited about it.
Yeah.
So do you think that people discover the museum when they come here in Springfield, or if they live here in the area?
Yeah, I think it's a little of both. I think we do get a lot of national and international travelers that come to the Armory either because they know the story of it and they want to see this place, or they are national park enthusiasts. And so they're really doing their kind of trek through New England or between Boston and New York and stopping here as one of their stops in sort of enjoying their national parks, because they really, they sort of recognize that it's a great place for learning and learning about our history, whether it's our natural history or our cultural history. And I think, and of course there's always the local folks who say, I was there in 5th grade,
Right.
And maybe they come back with their families. But it is, an integral part of some of the backstory of the highlights of American history. For instance, during the Revolutionary War, I always say there's sort of the bookends. We were the spot where Henry Knox is bringing his noble train of artillery from Fort Ticonderoga to Boston for the siege of Boston. And this is the central place he stops and comments on the location, that it's a wonderful location, it is secure, and he recommends to General Washington to set up an arsenal here, because there isn't one yet. They're just a new fledgling Continental Army, and they need a place to be able to bring weapons. There were a lot of craftsmen up and down the Connecticut River Valley who were able to come together here and help out. And then, as you mentioned, Shays' Rebellion, in the 1790s, at that point, we're a federal armory established by President Washington. And in Shays and, their cohort are rightly sort of saying, what about us? What about our rights? And especially as veterans of the American Revolution. And so, they make this move on going to the arsenal to get more armaments, and weapons. But really, they were citizens standing up. As you said, it really helped to finalize the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
So correct me if my historical analysis is incorrect. In my mind, what the Armory did was actually establish Springfield as a manufacturing/technological center,
Yeah.
because the Armory was here before a lot of the other manufacturing that we look at Springfield with great pride about.
Yeah.
So it was here before Indian Motorcycle. It was here before Smith & Wesson. It was here before Knox started making cars and fire engines in Springfield. It was here before the Duriers developed the very first gasoline-powered automobile in America. And to my mind, because the Armory needed skilled labor, it started developing a pool of skilled labor that then other manufacturers could say, well, wait a minute, there's all these guys who know how to build things, how to design things. I've said to people, without the Armory, I don't know what Springfield would have been, other than a town on the river.
Yes, and the Connecticut River Valley as a whole. I will say one of my favorite objects in our collection in the museum is the Blanchard lathe. So before you can make the product, they had to invent the machines to make those products. And so things like the Blanchard lathe, which we have the original one from 1822, that Thomas Blanchard invented there, took a chunk of wood and carved it into an uneven piece. And so that was the gun stock for there, but it also translates into chair legs and baseball bats and everything else. And lathes are very common in manufacturing. So I think it really led in this invention, and that was really a huge part of the Armory. They had to continually do research and design and invention. They always had laboratories. But they also, as the Federal Armory, always relied on contractors. So other artisans that are out there, like Eli Whitney, he's down in New Haven, Connecticut. He becomes a contractor, and he's inventing a lot of different things, as we know he's most famous for. And so a lot of other inventors. So I always say from New Haven, Connecticut up to Windsor, Vermont, you've got people who are doing these inventions, creating machinery, creating new products, and inventing the integrated factory system and inventing interchangeable parts. Again, almost everything we have has interchangeable parts. For the Armory and for the Federal Armory, it was about readiness and safety for the soldier in the field, on the battlefield. But for every day, even this, I can take another globe and I can take that piece and I can put that on there and it will still be precise. And as you pointed out, that really leads to everything else that Springfield is known for in terms of industry and innovation. And I think it really sparked that through the Connecticut River Valley.
And unfortunately, when the Johnson administration made the decision to close the Armory, a lot of people view that as this very big milestone in Springfield history for the negative, because then all of these tooling and die guys, all of these machinists, all of these precision manufacturers certainly had to scurry for other work. But although today, if you take from New Haven up to Vermont, we're in a corridor of precision manufacturing that essentially is the great-great-great-grandchild of the Armory in many ways. Because we still have all of this precision manufacturing basically in the I-91 corridor.
As the Federal Armory, the production went up in times of war and then it went down. So those employees, they would then just transfer to other businesses and industry here in the greater Springfield area. So you had this symbiotic relationship that really assisted in manufacturing of many, many products.
So there's a whole bunch of stuff happening around the Armory, and we want to go through all of this. I've got my notes. She has got her notes. We'll get this straight. First of all, coming up very soon, April 19th through the 27th, right?
Yes.
Is National Park Week.
Yeah.
And so I take it this is to acknowledge all of the national parks across the country.
Yeah.
Is anything special planned for the Armory?
Yeah, nicely enough for us here in Massachusetts, National Park Week always falls during school vacation week too. And, around the events in Lexington and Concord, the anniversaries and things like that. So we always plan activities for kids and their families. Some of the things, and I brought my notes so my park rangers would know I'd say these things correctly. We'll have some junior ranger activities during the day, during the week, when kids can come in, learning about everything from the Armory itself and sort of what was there to things like bugs and dinosaurs and sort of science of the week, exploring the landscape outside. We're also going to have some special speakers. One woman who's from the local area volunteered at Katmai National Park and Preserve last year, along with Fat Bear Week. They're known for their brown bears.
Okay.
And so she's going to do a talk about that national park and what it's like to be a volunteer, because that's the other thing that we're usually celebrating during National Park Week are all the volunteers. We have a wonderful core of volunteers just here, and every national park really relies on volunteers to help us, and they bring their own energy and knowledge about the parks, and they're really a great help. And then we're also going to have some Earth Day activities, helping out with some community events that will be happening. There's a fishing derby that happens during that week, and we'll be helping with that. I think we're also helping at the Springfield museums with some of their science activities. And then we always, in the National Park Service a few years ago, there are national park passes that you can get to go and visit your national parks where they charge a fee. There is now a military pass that's free of charge, and it goes to active military families and to veterans. You just have to sort of show your ID, but we're also going to highlight that during the week and give out those passes at the site. So.
Wow. Okay. Lots of activities.
Yeah.
Is this stuff up on your website, by the way?
It is. Yeah, we do have an events calendar. I should also mention we help to manage the New England National Scenic Trail, which
I am in complete ignorance of this, so please let's talk about that.
Yeah, there are national trails throughout the country. The Appalachian Trail is the most well-known.
Right.
It's not the longest, but it's definitely the most well-known. Well, we have the distinction of having the shortest of the 11 national trails. The New England Trail runs from the Long Island Sound up the Connecticut River Valley, 220 miles to the border of Massachusetts and New Hampshire. It roughly follows what most people know as the Metacomet-Monadnock Trail.
Okay.
It was designated about 12 years ago as a national trail. And so it really just kind of brings that sort of extra distinction and highlights. And we work very closely with two amazing trail partners in Connecticut, the Connecticut Forest and Parks Association, and here in Massachusetts, the Appalachian Mountain Club. So they really do a lot of the trail maintaining and getting volunteers and getting young people to get out on the trail. So they're going to help us out with having one of the hikes during National Park Week at Mount Norwottuck, and it's going to be a bark ranger hike, so that means you bring your dog.
Oh, okay.
And you get to learn about sort of helping to...
so does this trail run like through Springfield or through this area?
It runs really through, so from Southwick, so the closest, so it's on the other side of the river from Southwick, and then up through Holyoke, in that area, and up through the Holyoke Range.
Okay.
So it heads up that way. So not directly in Springfield, but very close by. And Holyoke's been very active in having some high school youth crews, trail crews, the last few years. And it's really great to see those young people get out and not even being aware that they're so close to some of their trails and how they can actually be active participants in maintaining and the trails. And this year, the Appalachian Mountain Club actually got a grant through the National Park Foundation to help with accessibility hikes. So they're working with some groups to bring aided devices to help actually be on the trails. And it brings awareness to the areas of trails that are most accessible to people. Because obviously there's quite a range
Oh, sure, I would imagine so.
of terrain.
Yeah, because you're hiking through the woods.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
wow, I was not even aware that. I knew the Appalachian Trail went through this area, but I didn't know about this other
Yeah,
trail.
so it kind of parallels that.
Oh, wow, that's excellent. That's cool. Okay, we've talked about National Park Week.
Yeah.
The museum itself has been around for 50 years. You're
Yeah.
up for an anniversary soon, right?
Yeah, so this year is our 50th anniversary as a national park, and as maybe most people know, or not sure, a national park begins with local citizens, usually, right, and the local legislation saying, hey, we think this place is really important. And as soon as the Armory closed of the Federal Armory in 1968, there was talk, and for a time the city had an organized group that actually maintained it as a museum. And then eventually it got that support through Congress to be legislated by 1974 as a national park. And so it designated a sort of unique legislation in a way for its day, in that it took part of the grounds of the Armory and made it the federal national park, along with the exhibits. There had always been a museum since the 1870s of the arms and...
Is it the same building that the museum is now?
No, it's a different building. The building that we're in was the arsenal, so it was sort of the final point of production.
Okay.
And then, of course, it was with the state of Massachusetts designing it to be Springfield Technical Community College on part of the campus. But creating it so that we would all, no matter what we did with these buildings, how those were used, that they would maintain the preservation and the look and the landscape of the Federal Armory itself.
So, just again,
yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong. So where the Armory Museum is, the grounds of STCC,
Yeah.
I understand that that was really the R&D area, and the manufacturing of weapons was at the water shops. Is that correct?
Yeah, really 3 different locations. So you had the water shops, which is just downhill, right at the ponds.
Right, and very close to my house.
Okay.
I live in that neighborhood.
Excellent. So that was the really first points of production, the forge, the foundry, so getting the molds together. And then the assembly, most of the assembly would then happen in what they called the hill shops. So that is our present location. And so you had assembly, but yes, as you're correct, most of the research and design people were up there, and they're testing the equipment in all kinds of simulated weather conditions.
Sure.
But then you also have in the hill shops the people who live there. So the Army personnel lived right there on site. So next to the museum today is the commanding officer's quarters.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
I know that there's been efforts and discussion in the past about restoring that.
Yeah.
Where we stand on that right now.
Yeah, still hoping to restore that one day. It's not a small price tag to do that, but we would
So
definitely...
that was a residence.
It was. It was the residence for the commanding officer of the Armory. So, and it's a pretty big house.
It's a beautiful house.
It's huge. And then there's also junior officers' quarters, and there were other buildings that would have been used as sort of enlisted members. So that, yeah, it was both a place that you lived and worked, right? And they had everything to accommodate workers, especially during World War II. You have Federal Square that's just across Federal Street. That whole complex built up in the late 19th and early 20th century and had its biggest boom during World War II. And
I
so,
was going to say, was World War II the greatest number of employees for the Armory, the time of its greatest productivity, so
it
to
really
speak?
was. Yeah, you have the invention of John Garand invents the M1 Garand, and that becomes the rifle of the soldier in the field during World War II. And the production was huge, about 14,000 employees. And what I find amazing is that almost 50% of those employees were women.
Right.
Right? So it's a huge time for Springfield itself. In fact, it was so recognized that Springfield was not only with the Springfield Armory at its center, but all of the other manufacturing switching to wartime production. And so it's a huge boom for Springfield at the time. And, we call ourselves the city of homes, and you have this huge development of neighborhoods during World War II with people coming here and then establishing themselves here in Springfield. It's one of the things that we're really proud of with the city. 2 years ago, we helped them apply for what's called the World War II American Heritage City Program. And there's a city in each state that's sort of hoped to be designated. And Springfield is the city that was designated last year for the state of Massachusetts.
Now, what does that designation mean to folks?
Yeah, mostly attaboy.
Okay.
But it comes with some great ideas and a network of people out there in other cities throughout the United States that are recognizing that history. One of the things that here the city and the veterans group here has been working toward is a marker program to actually designate some markers around the city in front of some of the buildings that would have been the points of industry to really highlight what happened during World War II. One of the things we've always done for years at the Armory in the summertime is host a big band concert.
Right, yes.
And that is to commemorate and pay homage to the fact that Benny Goodman and his orchestra came here and played for 10,000 war workers to honor the work that they had been doing here. And so, pretty exciting.
This all dovetails besides the Armory, you go up the street a little bit more, you have the Indian motorcycle.
Yeah.
And Indian motorcycle was producing the motorcycle for the U.S. military to use in Europe.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of war effort in this community at that time.
Yeah, and it was definitely recognized. Over at the Federal Square area, the warehouses that were built in had fluorescent lighting so that they could have 3 shifts, right?
Right.
Work around the clock. And it was one of the first areas that had this fluorescent lighting, sort of state of the art, right?
Right.
To make it as bright as possible. And so FDR, the President Roosevelt came here to see that. So he knew that Springfield was definitely making its mark.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. You have the responsibility of this historic site, but as I understand it, you're also involved with a historic site in Hartford, which is where the Colt manufacturing people were, manufacturing the gun that won the West.
Right.
And it's called Coltsville. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Coltsville, we're working toward establishment there, but Coltsville as a National Historical Park really looks at an entire historic district there in Hartford. If you're on 91 and you go by and you see this blue onion dome that most people think is a Russian Orthodox church or something like that.
It's really spectacular.
Yeah, and Sam Colt wanted something that would stand out. And so he pointed to architecture he saw in Russia while he was showing the Tsar of Russia his new invention.
Wow, cool.
And he brought that back. But he really created an industrial planned neighborhood. And we were sort of well known here in New England for planned industrial cities anyway.
Right.
But, the centerpiece, of course, was the factory itself, but it also had, they built a church, an Episcopal church for the workers. They had worker housing. He built specific cottages that they called the Potsdam cottages because he wanted a particular type of worker and craftsman from Potsdam. So he built these sort of houses that would resemble what they knew. And those still stand. Colt Park is a city park in Hartford, but it was the backyard for Sam and Elizabeth Colt, who had their mansion, of course, at the top of the hill, where they could look over and see the dome. And then there were managers' housing. So all of those elements still exist. And it was really due to Sam Colt. He died quite young, and in 1862. And so it was his wife who carried on, along with family members, carried on the actual Colt manufacturing. And she was known as a huge philanthropist in the community itself. And upon her death in 1904, she actually donated the grounds as a park. She built a statue to Sam Colt.
Wow.
And she created an old folks home, if you will, for women, single women. And that still is maintained today, and that's in what was their mansion.
Wow.
And then she donated a lot of their own belongings, artwork, furnishings to the Wadsworth Athenaeum. So we're fortunate in that this national park will be a place that you can visit. You can still see the church. It's still active. These places are still active. But you can also see in the Wadsworth Athenaeum, in the State Library, in the Museum of History and Culture in Connecticut, they all have bits of the collection itself, whether they're the collection from the factory or from the house itself. So it's quite a story. I mean, they were a huge industrialist family. Their impact, both culturally and sort of symbolically, was huge. And Elizabeth Colt is one of those sort of unknown characters that we want to explore a little bit more.
Sure.
And what she did in the 19th century as a business owner.
I want to take the last few moments to emphasize the fact that you've got activities for National Park Week,
Yeah.
which is April 19th through the 27th, so that's coming up pretty soon.
Yeah.
Easiest way for people to find out about what's on the schedule is to go to the website?
Yeah, definitely. And I did want to just mention that even for, as part of our spring and summer activities, we'll be actually doing some lectures about World War II, because it's VE Day is on May 10th. We'll be having a symposium. We have created a victory garden, and that will be opening in the end of May. So we actually see that as a way for volunteers and young people to maybe help and learn about victory gardens. And then for the 250th, we'll be having events both this September around Henry Knox and working with the Freemasons of Massachusetts to sort of honor that, and really leading up and having a new exhibit on the Arsenal period. And then leading up to next January, during the time that would be the 250th anniversary of Henry Knox coming through, there'll actually be a reenactment in mid-January during Martin Luther King Jr. weekend.
Now, if I remember my history, didn't Knox drag all those cannons on ox sleds through the snow?
Yes.
Are you hoping for snow then?
We're hoping for snow, yes. We're actually working with the folks of the Big E to kind of help us out with oxen and draft horses. We really want to see this happen, and there's a reenactment group that will be going from Fort Ticonderoga on certain weekends, leading all the way to Boston.
That's tremendous.
So we're excited that this is one of their stops and that we can honor that history and hope it's a citywide celebration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm impressed.
Thanks.
But I'm a history nerd. So.
Yeah. Well, come and see us anytime. We are open Wednesday through Sunday at the museum, and the grounds are always open.
So folks, if you haven't been to the Armory Museum and you live in the greater Springfield area, lots of going on from now through next January.
Yeah.
And I highly recommend the experience. It's a great museum. You'll learn a lot about our region. Thanks so much for coming by.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
And folks, thanks very much for tuning in to this edition of Government Matters here on Focus Springfield.